Hello! So today we're going to talk about mixing shop glazes here in our clay and glaze lab. And we're going to go over some of the best procedures, sort of best practices. Some of them may be specific to our lab if there are other folks viewing for other studios. But most of the information is transferable. So a couple of things on PPE. First, so we're always going to want closed-toed shoes. In non-pandemic times, we want an N95 mask. And once we start working with dry materials, we're going to want to turn on our ventilation system. So come with me and I'll show you where we do that. So our ventilation system is here. We're going to hit that big green button, and that's going to turn on the system. I'm not going to do that right now so we can have a little better audio for this video. Please turn it off when you're done. And then also pay attention because it'll automatically turn off after 35 minutes. Hopefully you're taking care of business and it doesn't take you longer than 35 minutes, but if it does turn off, come back and turn it back on. In non-COVID times, we'll have N95 masks stocked right here. If you don't, those of you who don't have your own respirators can grab one of these. Should you grab one of these, be sure to grab a Ziploc baggie, and there should be a Sharpie up here. And keep that mask in here because we can reuse it for multiple times. Okay, so if we're going to be mixing one of our batch glazes to refill it, we have mixing instructions right here. And that's going to go over the best practices as far as what materials we put in first and how we go about mixing it. If you're mixing up one of our shop glazes, we do not add material to this. We have a separate mixing bucket in there. And we're going to always mix in that first. So let's go out there and I'll show you where that's located. So back in our materials backstock, it should be right up here. And this should be a little better organized, but nonetheless it's right here. And if you need a step stool to get up there, we've got step stools located here, and then a slightly larger one right here. As you can see here, we've got this label. This is for shop glazes only. We're mixing. And then, of course, inside we've got our handy-dandy little dolly. So this is the bucket that we're going to be mixing in. So if we look under mixing instructions, the first suggestion is we're going to actually weigh out our water and put that in first. Okay, so we are going to get our mixing station set up. We've got a couple pieces of new equipment coming in and some redesign. So this is a bit of a temporary setup, but we should be able to find this scale here. It's a highly accurate scale that we'll use for our glazes. It also measures large volumes, so it's great for this kind of stuff. Of course, when we start doing our stains and things that are under 500 grams, we'll use the test sieves over, the test scales over here. And as you can see, this has got a maximum of 600 grams, much more accurate for small things. If you're mixing something less than our giant shop glazes or a 5-gallon bucket, we also have this scale here, which you can see has a 5,000 gram capacity, which will take care of most of the materials that you might be using if you're mixing a 5-gallon bucket or a 3-gallon bucket. And to do that, we would come over here and grab one of these larger, you can come with me, camera, one of these larger scoops or something to then set on that scale. But for today, I'm going to show you how to mix our big batches using that excellent mega OHAS scale. So we'll pull it out from over here so we can get it closer to our ventilation system. We've got an extension cord back here. Do make sure that it's not stretched across so that if there are other students, they still have access. And then we can go ahead and turn this on. Let it boot up. And then we're going to want to put it in grams because that's what our recipes are in, so we can change our units here. So those are ounces. We should be able to get to grams, pounds and ounces. So all of our dry mixing, I'm going to spin this back to me. If you want to join me over here, camera. All of our dry mixing should be done in the dry bucket, which you'll find over here. Want to make sure that this is nice and clean. I would not use water to clean it, because then you're going to have to dry it out. So just make sure that that interior is nice and clean, and we'll use this as our container on the scale. Okay, so as we look at our recipe sheets here, this gives us the percentage batch, which is really good because it's easily scalable. And today we're going to be mixing a 10,000 gram batch, which isn't actually going to be all that much. It's going to be about a half bucket or a quarter bucket. But since these are some new glazes, we don't want to mix up a giant batch and then nobody loves them. So we'll see how they get used before we make up a big one. So right now, step one, we're going to mix the 7,000, or we're going to weigh out the 7,800 grams of water just over here, and you can follow me so we can see our best practices there. So we've got our scale here. We're going to want to zero this by hitting the tare button. It's in grams, and we'll just do a quick check to see if that'll get up. Yeah, no problem getting to 7,000. Not sure if this is the official filler upper, but this can be used. We do have this down here, which is probably what we should use to fill up our bucket. I like to have it on the shower function. It tends to spray you a little bit less and fills it up pretty quickly. Alright, so we've got our water weighed out, and we're going to go ahead and put that in our mixing bucket. Make sure that all goes there. We can go ahead and return this back to its home. And then so if you look at our mixing instructions, after we weighed out our water, the first step is to add the bentonite, which we look at our recipe is all the way down here. So at 2%, when we're mixing 10,000 grams, that's going to be 200 grams. We don't want to use this for that small amount. We're going to go over there and use our test scale. And then after we weigh out that 200, we're going to go ahead and plunge it. Our test mixer scales will be over here. We want to grab one of them and turn it on. And that's just by hitting that 0 button, and it should come on. Now, it has a maximum of 600 grams. So if we put this on, we're gonna have to subtract that number from the 600, and that gives us our total measurable capacity. In our case, we only need to measure 200, so that's fine. We can leave this on here. So we'll hit 0. And camera, if you want to zoom out a little bit. So all of our materials that we use in clay and glazes are either going to be here or down here in these large buckets. They're in alphabetical order. So we can find bentonite right here. If there's a material that you don't find up here but is in your recipe, check down here. These are ordered in a slightly different way that's not alphabetical, but there's not too many to check. Okay, cool. Our mixer. This is not one that you'll commonly find in ceramic studios, although it is an exceptionally cool mixer. These are typically used in kitchens, and it falls into the category of a high shear mixer, which is our optimal kind of mixing that we want to do for clay and glazes. It has a very, very sharp blade. And when I say very sharp, I mean if you touch this, it will cut you. It is razor sharp. So we're not going to ever touch this for any reason. We're just going to use water to clean it, etc. You may find this in its home with the immersion stick part twisted off, because we can do that sometimes to clean it. We never want to get any water or material in here. And of course, we don't want to get any water or other material in the motor itself. So if you're not sure how to use this, or you haven't been checked out officially on it, just go find a grad student, myself, or one of our artists in residence. So one of the awesome things about this is that it's a variable speed. So that's done on this thumb wheel here. And then it also has a continuous on function, meaning that we don't have to hold it while we're mixing. So to get it to turn on is a little bit kooky because there's a bunch of safety features. So this is our off button, labeled off. And then we have a trigger squeeze here, and then a top button as well. And it will stay on. It's quite loud, unfortunately, but it'll stay on. Like I mentioned, very sharp, very dangerous. Do not do this. Do not turn it on outside of it with your material. And as you can see, it's going to give us some really good mixing, okay? And particularly if we increase that speed. So we're going to go ahead and add our bentonite, get our mixer in here going. And then over here, we've got our dry bucket ready to weigh out our materials. Again, we always want to be sure to tare the scale so that it's zeroed with the weight of that. So on our recipe, things are written in grams, and then here we're reading in kg, kilograms, which means 1,000. That's one of the wonderful things about the metric system that is really frustrating about the imperial system. Inches are imperial, pounds are imperial, and kilograms and grams are metric. So if we need 4,000 grams, that means we need 4 kilograms. 4,000. Kilo means 1,000. So best practices for scooping our materials and bringing them over there is either to bring the bucket, empty gray dry bucket, over to whatever material you may need. Our first material is custard feldspar. Or we're going to grab one of these and a scoop, so we can scoop it and kind of carry it like this, so we don't have powder going everywhere. We've got our vent on, we've got our material over here, and we're just going to add that up until we get to our 4,000, excuse me, we're doing the center batch, so we want 2,000 custard feldspar. So we've already got 1,000. There we go. Once we've got a material ready, we can take it in here. Best practices, we have our other stuffing tube over here. So in each one of these materials, there should be its own dedicated small scoop, and be sure to put that scoop back in there when you're done. So we've got our last material going in here, which is the 75 grams of iron oxide. And because this is a colorant, we're always going to want to add that last, mostly because it keeps our mixing containers clean, stuff like that. So we can just add that in, and then we'll use the high shear mixer to make sure this is totally blunged up. So since we're done with all of our dry material additions and mixing, we're going to go ahead and wash up all the things that we've used so far. So this should be much cleaner and much more organized, of course, once you come here. But we just want to give it a good cleaning. Okay, so once we've got that mixed up, where it looks pretty homogeneous, we're not getting any chunks, we're going to want to use something like this just to get the rest of that powder out of the inside. Never, ever, under any circumstances, put your hand into this bucket with this thing on. No reason to ever do that. Do not do that. And in fact, this should actually be out and set somewhere where it's not going to create a mess or fall and break itself. So, if we're just scraping on the inside, we can use something like this or a metal metal rib. You just want to get all that material in there. We also want to get down a little bit because there's usually about an inch down. There's kind of a band of material that sometimes doesn't get incorporated. And then we'll do one last little plunge to make sure that it's all mixed up and homogeneous. Okay. So the last steps in our glaze mixing process is to screen or sieve the glaze that we've just made into the bucket underneath here. And then after that, we're going to test it with something called the Viscometer, and that'll tell us whether we've got the right amount of water in there. So this is the sieve that we're going to use for our large buckets. We also have screens here. If you're doing 5-gallon buckets, these fit nicely in there. Take note of the mesh size. So this also follows with sandpaper. So as we get a higher number, the smaller the holes in the screen are. For our glazes, and for most all glazes, anything that is a 60 or an 80 is sufficient. Something at 100, you're going to end up with a lot of material that doesn't go through there. And, 40 might be a little bit too open. This is our big glaze mixer. The screen for it should be located right here in the tray. It's right here. To put that in, we just lift this up and it should slide right in. And of course, we're going to take all of this apart to clean it. If you have a smaller batch of glaze, I would suggest using one of those. They're a little quicker to clean up. We're also going to need to install these brushes, which you actually do before you put the screen in. And they just go right in here. And they slide in just like this. And then we'll get our screen in there. Note that it goes in like this so that the gasket rests. In there, just like that. Okay. We're going to take our glaze contents that are in here and we're going to pour it through this screen, and then we're going to use this to push it through. I mentioned testing the viscosity. Now we do that once we put it in here instead of testing it here, because a lot of times we're going to have some glaze in here, and that may have a lower viscosity or a higher viscosity. And ultimately what we care about is what glaze we're going to be using, not necessarily what we just mixed. So when we're lifting this to put it in here, if you don't feel comfortable lifting it, get somebody else to help, because if we're mixing those large batches, it can be pretty heavy. So don't be afraid to ask for some assistance. The last thing we want is a giant mess. Practices, we don't want to wash out all this material into our sink. We want that in our glazes, and for one, environmental reasons, cost reasons, etc., best practices, and you can take this to your studio as well after you graduate, become uber famous. So we're going to take clean water, clean sponge, not a ton of water, and we're just going to wipe this out, make sure we get most of the stuff, and get all those sides cleaned. And then we're going to pour this material into our sieve. If any of you were raised on a budget family, it's like when you pour the spaghetti sauce in and you add a dash of water to shake it around and pour that into the sauce. Same idea. We get all our material going in there. And then we'll just take a tiny bit more water and clean this out. Get all that in there too. Okay, great. Just like when we assembled it, we're just going to go in reverse order for cleaning. So we'll pop that screen out, make sure we wash it well, and then we're going to slide these little brushes out, which we actually didn't even need because that glaze was so well mixed. And then we'll be sure to clean everything up and hang it up to dry. So once we've got everything all cleaned up, all of our screening and mixing things are put back and put away where they belong. We're going to do one last quick mix to homogenize any water on top, and then we're going to test the viscosity of the glaze. Okay, so to test our viscosity, we want to grab this kit, which you can ask your instructor about or grad student, and they'll get that for you. So we have two different size viscometers. They're going to give us the same reading. One is just slightly larger. If we have more glaze, it works better. If we have a shallower amount of glaze, we'll use this smaller viscometer. And if you'll notice on all of the recipes, we should have right here a number, a range that this should be between. As this is a brand new glaze, we don't have that written in yet, but I'm going to show you how to do it anyway. So one thing we want to do is be very careful because these are very fragile glass, as you can probably tell from their packaging. When we're taking them out, we don't want to drop them. If you do drop and break it, don't put it back and hide it. Just let us know, and that way we can order another one and we'll have it sooner. But just be very careful with it. So what we want to do, if you can follow me, camera, is we're going to set that in, and then we're just going to let go and see where it sinks to. I'll turn this so you can see those numbers. So right there. So the viscometer measures the density of material suspended in the liquid, and that'll eventually tell us, give us a consistency on our glaze application if you're dipping or pouring. So if our number is lower than what it is here, that means we've got too much water in there. And we'll just want to leave the lid off or talk to a grad student or an instructor. If it doesn't go far enough and the number is higher, that means we need to add a little bit of water, which is real easy and you can do that yourself. And do that at about, 16 ounces at a time. So like a pint glass or so, adding half at a time, mixing it and then remeasuring until we get the range that's listed on the bucket. And best practices for cleaning our high shear mixer is to get one of these buckets here, our general shop buckets, fill it up about 2/3 of water, and we'll use that to plunge and clean off most of the material, and then we'll use a sponge to clean off the rest. So you guys can see that if with the clean bucket of water and this thing cranking, we've got no glaze residue on the interior there. And that's why we approach it this way, because we don't want to do any cleaning around this blade. Believe it or not, it is literally razor sharp. And so we're good to go there. And then all we have to do is take our sponge and start cleaning off some of this material that's stuck on the shaft.